And there's big news about the Colts. A couple of big things that Shane Steichen and the Colts organization announced just a couple of minutes ago, which we will get to in just a second. But it's funny to me, I was thinking about over the course of the years, this particular day, and I know technically that like last night is when it started. I think for the NBA, for a lot of people, and a big part of this is because of the National Football League and just football season in general, and for that matter, college football as well. But for the NBA, I think for a lot of people on the American sports calendar or in the American sports culture and landscape, opening day of the NBA to a lot of people almost unofficially is Christmas Day. I think that's the day, and I realize by then games have been played forever, and now the in-season tournament from a year ago changed that a little bit because the in-season tournament, and we didn't know, and I'll be curious this year to find out whether or not we have the same oomph and enthusiasm and understanding, if you will, or perception of where it ranks nationally. Will we feel that same way if the Pacers are not one of the teams that's going to Las Vegas for the finals of it? I don't know. It felt like a year ago the in-season tournament did what it was supposed to do, which was make the NBA conversation mainstream before those Christmas Day games. But for so long for this market and this franchise, opening day of the NBA for the Pacers season, in particular for the Pacers, I think was really kind of exciting, and people got jazzed for it, and it was really kind of a circle the calendar date event because of the fact that it was the peak of the Pacers season for so long. Hey, come down and get your picture with a cardboard cutout with Wayman Tisdale. Come down and get your free magnet calendar for the year because we all know that they'll be lucky to win 38 games. You know, the pomp and circumstance and enthusiasm and excitement and almost the naivete as a fan base that this might have been the year that they broke through made it a special day for so long. But now that the Pacers for years we've become accustomed to them, you know, obviously I know that last year was a bounce back after some disappointing years, but there has been so much success in the postseason for so long and for so many years that opening day itself, while it is still cool, it doesn't spring with it or come automatically with like the subconscious of, well, this is kind of the peak. So it almost feels like it's not as like wow as it is as it has been in years past for that reason, because it's not the pinnacle of the season. For years, it was kind of the pinnacle of the season. It's not now, but it's very cool. I realize the Pacers starting not one but two on the road. That changes things a little bit. But nonetheless, opening day for the Pacers tonight, taking on the Pistons in Detroit. One of the things that we will talk about over the course of today. The other big thing, and I know that I go with what I call guarded optimism. I want you to pretend, Jimmy Cook, that optimism is a defensive lineman, okay? Name a good defensive lineman in the NFL.
Chris Jones.
Okay. Shocker. So,
got to put a clarifier there if you don't want me to do it.
If Chris Jones is the optimism, then I am Quentin Nelson. I am guarding optimism. I'm the guarded optimism here, okay? And I'm a cynic. I don't like that I'm a cynic. Sometimes I lose sleep over the fact I'm a cynic. It's not always the easiest way to live. But when the Colts come out as they did moments ago and Shane Steichen comes out and says, okay, I'm going to lead this off right now. Buck, which we know means DeForest Buckner, not the guy that's probably going to be doing the celebrity picks for ESPN Game Day at Bloomington. But Buck meaning DeForest Buckner. And JT, that doesn't mean Justin Timberlake, that's Jonathan Taylor. Buck and JT will practice today. Now, what that means is this. DeForest Buckner is now in the window of the 21-day period where he can at any point be removed off of the injured reserve and come back onto the roster and be immediately available. When he was put on the IR, that he had to go through that process where then the 21-day period, which is today, opens up, and at that time he returns, and then at any point they will assess him, and at any point they can make the determination, okay, he's good to go. At that point, he will be elevated onto the active roster, and somebody who is on the active roster will have to go to practice squad or release or whatever else. They'll have to make room for that. Now, Jonathan Taylor, again, we're told, things are trending in the right direction. My cynicism comes and my guarded optimism comes from the fact that we've heard that before, right? We've heard before, Anthony Richardson's ramping up things and he's practicing and he's throwing the football and Michael Pittman Jr. is going to go on IR, but Richardson's going to be playing against it. I mean, there's always, these things change. They're, as we say, fluid situations. But the good news is those guys are in uniform. Those guys are out there, and I think we are looking towards, certainly in Taylor's case and probably in Buckner's case, the probability that for this very tough stretch that the Colts are getting ready to go through, including a huge game in Houston, that both of them are going to be available, certainly if not this week, then the week after when they go, I believe it's to Minnesota. But things do indeed look like they are starting from a health standpoint to turn the corner and get going in the right direction. So that is the good news there. Also, our friend Mike Chappell, who you hear each and every week on this program from CBS 4 and WXIN Fox 59. My understanding is that the media room at the Colts complex is now the Mike Chappell Media Room. Did I get the terminology correct there, Eddie?
You are correct.
Yes.
Okay. And well-deserved because he's been the longest-running media member now.
And he's just the best. I love Chap.
Guy.
Like in general, he'll always take time to talk with you. He's one of the most knowledgeable people around, and as you mentioned, just a well-deserved honor. I'm very happy for him.
I've been covering him since the very first day that the Colts arrived on the Mayflower. And, of course, back then he was writing for Anderson and then made the move over to Indianapolis. So congratulations to Mike Chappell on that. All right, let's get to everything that's going on. Good afternoon to you on this Hump Day Wednesday. My name is Jake Query, Jimmy Cook here as well that you just heard. Eddie Garrison is the CEO of the company, and we have an intern today. Did you know that, Jimmy?
I did know that.
Query & Company just started an intern program. Cash Wooden, who is a freshman at Plainfield High School, he's the pride of the Quakers. He is in here shadowing today. My understanding, playing hooky. The Plainfield school cops just called over here asking if we'd seen him, and I said, well, I don't know.
Well, you know why he did it, don't you? Our show does so well with kids that, he just he
loves
needed to be part
get
of
to know
it in
your
person.
listener.
Exactly.
Loves
yeah,
to,
yeah.
No, he's a grown man. Now, Cash, I said, Cash Wooden, you related to John? Eddie, I asked him the question. You have the sound effect over there. Cash Wooden of Plainfield High School, are you related to UCLA and Indiana State legendary basketball coach, 10 national championships, the pride of Martinsville, Indiana, John Wooden? Are you related? He is indeed.
Very cool.
Yeah, great nephew. I don't know the relationship. I just know he said he's related. And I figured, and I always forget that the town, is it Hope, Indiana? Is that the name of the town where John Wooden and Branch McCracken is his forever resting place is like 200 yards from where John Wooden was born. Can you look up, Eddie? I think it's Hope, Indiana. It's right outside of Monrovia where John Wooden was born. The house is still there where he was born. And then, of course,
Have you been there to that house?
I have.
Not Hope, Hall.
Hall, Indiana. Thank you. Hall, Indiana. My apologies.
Did anybody yell at you?
I should know that because there are two Hall of Famers that are on either side of where that house is. I'm sorry, that are on either side of the town sign that says Hall, Indiana. John Wooden and Branch McCracken. At any rate, Cash, nice to have you in here. So we'll begin with this, Jimmy. Last night, the NBA underway. Pacers underway tonight in Detroit. Does it take any wind out of the sail that they're on the road and that they're also against Detroit, which is one you're like, oh, they get one more preseason game?
No, I mean, we could make the jokes about Detroit. I know that I have no problem with doing it. John mentioned earlier last week that this is he loves the phrase must win and people give him a hard time. Yeah, you want to start the season off on the right footing. To your point about opening day, I think the reason for it not feeling like the peak anymore for a Pacers fan or for any NBA fan that's in this same boat, the Pacers now have expectations. The Pacers are now publicly at least talking about or entertaining the idea of what their clear-cut goal is, what the goal of all 30 teams is, but what their goal is this year, which is to contend for a championship. They got that taste of a conference finals appearance a year ago. They feel like their roster is more connected now than it was a year ago. They feel like they're healthy and ready to go. And they feel like they have plenty of options to beat you on a nightly basis. Now, they need to get better defensively. Across the board, we know that needs to happen. They need to have, if they want to be as dominant as a Boston or as a, I would say New York, but you saw how they got handed to. But you get what I'm saying. The top of the conference, their defense needs to be more like what it was throughout the entirety of the postseason last year over the course of the regular season. I know that's not fully sustainable, but you need your defense to meet you somewhere halfway. That said, I'm excited. I'm hyped for it for all the reasons you outlined. This is a year where it's no longer, man, shucks, wouldn't it be great just to make the playoffs? Boy, that'd be fun. Get them back there. No, now it's you have a taste and you feel like you have a core that has franchise pieces now. Go make some noise. That's why I'm very excited about it, because all this summer of Olympics and Tyrese Halliburton growth and what Benedict Matherin's role going to be and Darius Walker takes a step forward, all of that, there's no more talking about it. Now it's go time tonight. I'm very excited for the start of this new campaign.
I think one of the things that's going to be interesting is this, and I understand, I don't have a problem with, nor is it relevant if I did, the Pacers' mindset or strategy from last year of we're going to run it back. We're going to run it back. We like what we have. We didn't need, huge changes to be made.
They were in every game against Boston.
Correct. And then Halliburton, obviously towards the end there you had the injury. I do think that Halliburton's the hamstring and leg injury, I think, and obviously it recurred, but I think that really did limit him down the home stretch for the final quarter of the season last year. But when you look at, and I know that they might be a little bit more financially limited is probably unfair to say, because I do think that if it was a chance to go over the top, that Herb Simon would go into the tax. I mean, I do think that. I don't know that they felt they had to do that because they have good young players. There are two ways to look at the thought process of, like, we're going to run it back. One, which the Pacers were guilty of, was when you had the Sabonis-Turner experiment, if you want to call it that, and they ran that for like 2 or 3 years to give it every look that they could. And I think a lot of people got restless with it of, why are they running this back? It clearly doesn't work. Even you could see what the ceiling was for that, and it wasn't going to work. And kudos to them that they then came out and said, you know what? We're going to start on the ground floor here, and we are scaling this thing, stripping this thing all the way down. And they were very transparent about that. Now, the we're going to run it back sentiment or narrative, to use that buzzword, feels like it has more concrete to it, of the fact that what they are saying is, we have a group that at this point, the biggest emphasis and accentuation that is necessary towards pushing it is simply experience and age. Because Tyrese Halliburton's a young player. Andrew Nembhard's a young player. Benedict Matherin's a young player. Isaiah Jackson's a young player. Aaron Nesmith is a young player. Not only by their age, but also by their big moment experience. And so you looked at that and said, okay, they really don't need a lot of icing on this cake. It just needs to kind of sit and continue to cool a little bit now, or warm up, I guess, better term. Obi Toppin would be the one piece that they maybe had to get aggressive or dip into the pocketbook to retain him, and they did that with zero hesitation. I mean, that was, okay, let's go. Here we go. The thing to me that I'm the most curious about with that process, one would assume that with more experience, more comfort level, more minutes as a group, understanding the nuances of playing on the floor together with different combinations, Ben Shepherd feeling more comfortable, all of those things. One would assume that automatically makes you, let's say, 8% better, 10% better. And if they were 8 to 10% better than what they won a year ago, what did they win, 48 games in the regular season?
Something like that.
I'm guesstimating.
Yeah.
So that puts you now a little over 50. That puts you in the category of that 4-5 seed, somewhere that maybe a 3-4. What I'm curious about is the rest of the East. Milwaukee, who didn't have Giannis in the postseason. Obviously Boston, we know how good they are. Cleveland, who had some pieces that were out for the vast majority of the final quarter of the season a year ago and into the postseason. As those teams get healthier and have their full arsenal back, do they elevate themselves beyond 8 to 10%? Is Cleveland 15% better than they were a year ago? Is Milwaukee with Giannis 20% better than they were a year ago? Et cetera. And it feels like the Pacers may actually kind of stand pat in terms of where the number of wins and what they're doing, and you think that that's a regression, but I don't know that it is, Jimmy, because I think the East is going to be that much better. But it's good to know that they are one of those that we look right at, and they are amongst a handful of teams that you would say, if they make a deep run, wouldn't surprise me at all. Again, right?
Yeah, ignore what you saw last night. New York thinks they're going to be a big-time player in the Eastern Conference once again. They feel like that they are going to be able to battle Boston in a better way than they did through 4 quarters last night. The Orlando Magic feel like they have this young core that was still kind of right there learning in themselves a season ago. And how is their young core going to rise? Cleveland is still there. You already mentioned Milwaukee. I know the Paul George stuff health-wise in Philadelphia, but if they can just be in the mix and have a healthy core going into the playoffs, now it's a long time from now, they're going to be in the mix. So yeah, it's a loaded Eastern Conference, and you're not even mentioning the defending champions in the Boston Celtics, who, on a overreaction Wednesday, I guess, if you will, the NBA pundits are already saying, hey, run away, like this team's maybe better than they were a year ago after just one game against the Knicks. So, yeah, the league did not get worse over the time the Pacers decided their run it back, but I would still argue, to your point, Jake, they have every reason to believe they can hang with anybody in the Eastern Conference and the NBA as a whole on any given night, especially if they're able to play on the defensive side of the ball the way they did in the postseason. That, and I'm expecting a big year from Benedict Mathurin. I know me and Kevin Bowen are the two big, beating the drum for him the last couple of seasons. I'm not going to sit here and say he's definitely going to be a starter by season's end because Rick Carlisle has made it clear you have to earn that. That's not something that's going to be handed to him. But even if it is as a sixth man, I believe his offensive prowess and him he's only 22 years old. Like, Benedict Mathurin is by no stretch of the imagination a finished product. I think it's going to be a massive season for him. And regardless of if it's starting 5 or if it's as your sixth man or one of your key pieces off the bench, his development and him taking a leap forward in year 3 is as paramount to anything of them surpassing their Eastern foes.
Eddie, you have been intently, more so than I've ever seen before, following this conversation. You look like you see like a meme or is it GIF? What do we call it?
I go GIF, but some people
GIF?
get mad at me.
GIF
of like a cat watching
Classic.
a tennis ball going back and forth with the two of us talking.
or just like a tennis match, just going back and forth. Turning my head.
You several times look like you wanted to pounce in with your and opine with your Pacers observations.
Not really. I'm just enjoying the conversation so far.
Did
It's
you have
opening night.
Just out of curiosity, do you still have a watermelon aftertaste in your mouth?
No, not
Okay.
today.
Just wanted to make sure. Speaking of that, over the weekend, did anybody happen to check in on the Query and Company fantasy football? And I realize that,
Yes.
that nobody outside of the 12 playing care about our fantasy football leagues, but we do have to occasionally mention this because you guys insisted on doing a live draft on the air, and we got listeners involved and everything else. I'm going up against Matthew this week, the Maniacs.
To be clear, based on the focus groups that me and Eddie did, and kids especially were big fans of this, everybody loved the idea of the live draft show. You were the only one that got mad at us for doing it.
And here's the thing. I mean, doing a live draft during the radio show itself kind of felt like, I don't know, I had a job to do. One of us was that day being a professional. And
It was Eddie.
And so I went ahead and just set my
Always.
team to queue. And
Yep.
I just ahead of time, I'm like, here's my top 100 players, whatever.
You let him go.
And then, so the computer picked my roster, and then I had to go in and make all kinds of changes, wholesale changes. I was literally like, I'm trying to think of somebody from an executive standpoint professionally that's just constantly making trades and aggressive. That's what I was. And you guys mocked it because I had like 3 quarterbacks. I had no running backs. You guys were guffawing, rolling on the
I
ground.
feel like we're slightly over-exaggerating here. We just laughed at the fact that you did have 3 quarterbacks.
So I decided that it would be fun to look at the standings.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Cash, who was the nice fellow that brought me my Kincaid's meat hat when we were out at the state fair, good dude. He's got a really good team, 5-2. Now, I think he's the one last week that beat me by like 0.1 point. I needed a tight end to make a catch late in the game. It didn't happen. But that's okay. He's 5-2, okay? Then we've got Nick, who's also 5-2. Fair. Good. Third place, or the first of those in second, whichever way you'd like to look at it. Oh, what? Who's that? Query. Okay. So trying to over 500, should be better.
Should be better.
Then we have Karina. Remember, Karina called in. She was one of the last ones to get a team, a roster late, right?
Why should be better? Where do you feel your team has failed you?
Well, because I had the point. I was 0.1 away from being 5-2.
I forgot you had that. Yeah.
Okay.
I forgot about that.
Was it this league?
What's that?
Are you sure it was this league?
Yeah. Rick is 4-3. So too is Broken Colt 4-3. Gritty 4-3. So we got a log jam here, right? Jennifer, by the way, at 4-3. Then things take a pretty serious dip downward. This is kind of like when you're driving along the Pacific Coast Highway and you're like, look at this, it's just beautiful. Beautiful cliffs and white water and blue and birds and just gorgeous. That's what the top half of our league looks like. And then all of a sudden the Pacific Coast Highway, you take a hard left turn and you're driving, and next thing you know you're at the Inland Empire. And you're like, well, this is less than aesthetic. Couple of like old broken down warehouses and a big truck stop full of. That's where you find watermelon gummies at 3 and 4. But there are nice areas of the Inland Empire a little because you're still kind of on the fringe of Orange County. So you can look at the positives. Like, for example, watermelon gummies has had the misfortune of seemingly playing everybody against them in their best week.
Yeah, I had losses where I scored 138, 145 points.
You know what? I don't know what to tell you. Life ain't always fair. Then we have Matthew from Maine, who admitted that this is the first time that Matthew has ever put together a fantasy football roster and was a little confused as to the construction of it, but is right there at 3 and 4. Joe's finest team, also 3 and 4. Okay, then we get down to we got a 2 and 5 team in the 11th position. And then things really take a hard turn. Sitting 12th, the guy that probably did more prep than anybody else came in with 4 magazines.
Not true.
Had all kinds of teams. But again, you get this a lot, and it's unfortunate, and it's a sad thing. When people start, it's like when you go to Vegas. What do casino owners in Vegas say? They say, I love when I see people checking in wearing a jersey of a team because I know I've got them. Because they're going to bet with their heart, not their head. Lo and behold, Jimmy Cook, who's been searching for a name for his fantasy team, and we've decided to name it Team Full of Chiefs. The team full of Chiefs that was put together with the heart, not the head. Yeah, I came in here a little bit high-fluting, nose in the air. Oh, I've done all my prep work. Let me giggle at you because you've got 3 quarterbacks, no running backs, and look at all the research I've done, and I've got all these guys on this prolific team. 1 and 6. And put together 39 points last week. Very, very well done, Jimmy. Congratulations. By the way, Jimmy's team is not a well-oiled machine, but your car can be if you go to Jiffy Lube. Now through the end of the year, anybody who belongs to a monthly car wash program, if the outside of your car looks spectacular, like, for example, Bill Cash's fantasy team, if the outside of the car looks great, you want to make sure that underneath the hood looks just as good. And that's where Jiffy Lube comes into play. When you go to any of the Jiffy Lubes in Central Indiana, just say to the Jiffy Lube team member, hey, you see that? I'm a member of a car wash program. And boom, $20 off a signature service oil change, and you're going to get a free tire rotation. That is big savings from the trusted one-stop shop for all your vehicle maintenance needs where you never need an appointment, talking about Jiffy Lube. Okay, when we come back, we mentioned it. Big news for the Colts. But what does it mean in terms of their preparation against Houston, and what is a big one? We will tell you about that. Dustin Dopirak going to join us on the program coming up at the top of the hour. Casey Vallier from the Colts in the 2 o'clock hour. It's Query & Company Hump Day Wednesday here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Colts Texans coming up on Sunday. By the way, April just sent a post on the X-Post Twitter that the fact that it made her think of my brainwave means everything, but it's so true. It's such a good point. She said, I was listening to Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics and then started thinking, this song came out 41 years ago. I'm pulling a Jake Query when I think I don't recall my parents listening to songs on the radio that came out in 1942 at that time. That's exactly correct. It's amazing to me. Like music from the mid-'80s is still, you still hear it. You go into Kroger or, whatever, you just hear it overhead. Our sister station, B105, J&V Takeover, all that, right? It's music from the 80s, and you guys know most of the songs. Yet when I was a kid in 1983, I don't ever remember walking in, and I realized that the war happened in the 40s and probably was a big part of the non-mainstream of, like, entertainment stuff sticking around. But, like, I don't remember people listening, like, walking around bopping to Glenn Miller in 1981. I just don't. And yet people still hear that stuff, and they know every word. Anyway, Colts and Texans. What we know is this, Jimmy. You had said yesterday. Thank you, Eddie. And I think you made a really good point here, Jimmy. If it doesn't necessarily eliminate the Colts at all out of getting to where they would like to go for the season if they were to lose this game, except for that it really makes the task of winning the division difficult. But if they're to win this game, it potentially, it's like watching a battleship, like all of a sudden turn around. It takes a second, and then once it gets to that point, it's turning around. You're like, oh, that bad boy's turning in the water. And that's, the Colts are just kind of plodding along. They have not been a pretty 2 consecutive wins. But if they get this one down there, they are all of a sudden now, the trajectory of where they could go, especially as they get healthier, really changes quickly.
Well, it rewrites a lot of the doubt that's been around this team for the last couple of weeks, since dating back really to the loss against the Texans a year ago. Because even from the most confident Colts fans, I'm talking about the one in January to end the season, you want to say you're a play away, you're a catch away, or you're, just a drive away from beating Houston. And then they come out in the opener and they played them close, but it never really felt like a game the Colts were going to go ahead and grab. And now Houston has shown a little bit of mortality, right? This is no longer a pipe dream. This is effectively a battle for, and I don't know how all the tie breaks go. Eddie is better at this than I am, but it is effectively for the AFC South lead if they are to beat Houston, right? I mean, I'm sure there'd be a tiebreak on division or conference record at that point, but they would both have a win over one another, and they would both be at equal footing.
Incorrect.
Okay, then elaborate.
Because the Colts have a lot. No. Yeah, the Colts have a loss to Jacksonville.
Okay, so
whereas Houston is still undefeated in the division, so Houston has the upper leg there.
So what I had mentioned was half true, in that it'd be a tiebreak of some kind, and you clarified it for me of it being where you stand within the AFC South. But look, if they get DeForest Buckner back, and this defense finally has up front where they're supposed to excel, where they're supposed to turn games, if they're able to get him back this Sunday, have a game record in his presence where you view him as one of the top defensive tackles still in the National Football League, and you're able to have Jonathan Taylor as both a decoy and a complementary piece for Anthony Richardson, they're going to have a chance in this game. You remove any of those, CJ Stroud's a better quarterback. They have a better receiving core. They certainly have a better, if Jonathan Taylor's off the board, running back core in that room. And defensively, they're pretty solid as well. So, Jake, it's the conversation for this team moving forward goes from either the South is in play or clinging and trying to tread water for a 6 or 7 seed in the playoffs. That's the reality of a win or a loss on Sunday against the Texans.
But let me ask you this, Jimmy. Is it too, I have my own thought on the answer, but I'm not going to lead the witness.
Okay.
Is it too early in the year to start wringing hands over hypotheticals or implications of one game versus others?
No, not in division. Not when you're talking about a 2-game lead at that point in terms of tiebreak. Not when you're talking about a Texans team who, well, Eddie mentioned, still have to play some tough opponents on the schedule as well, but this is the first game of this Colts gauntlet that we have been wringing our hands about for the last couple of weeks, because you look at who is still to come over this stretch, not in this particular order. Detroit, the Jets, the Bills. Like, there are heavyweight real championship aspiration teams all across this gauntlet of schedule for the Colts, to start off with a loss to Houston, which in my mind effectively eliminates you barring injury or something catastrophic with the Texans. It eliminates you from the South. No, it's a very real conversation in my mind to have because of what the Colts still have to go through and where the Texans would be edge-wise if they have that 2-game cushion effectively in division record.
While not disagreeing with you, haven't we seen before, though, the Texans where it was a foregone conclusion they were going to win the division, and then as the weather started turning in other places, as you got into like post-Halloween in through November, December, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. This is starting to open up a little bit here.
As somebody who going into last season was still the banger of the drum of the Texans, and when I say that, I mean they're like the Browns.
I understand.
They're like the Bears. They're a team that always falls apart. They will always get in their own way. I think I've been as strong as anybody in market about just what a laughing stock the Texans have been for the better part of the last decade, where you think, oh man, this is going to be their year, and then stuff implodes around them. I think that's fair sentiment. I don't fully disagree with you that it's something to keep in the back of your mind. I think this is different. I think it's a different group. I think CJ Stroud is... Deshaun Watson's season in 2019 was as good as any in the league at that time, to the point that you think that he's going to be in the same breath as Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and Aaron Rodgers at the time. I guess Burrow hadn't arrived yet, but you get my point. You thought he was going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League. We know what happened there. I still don't think it's insane to say that Stroud might be better. And Stroud might be the best quarterback the Texans have had maybe ever.
He's their best. I mean, who would be better?
I'm saying you could make an argument for what Watson did in 19 and how great he was there. But I just throw the caveat out there. That's why, though, I think it's different. I think that it's a different culture down in Houston. I think this is certainly the best collection of weapons they've had since the height of DeAndre Hopkins. And Stroud is not David Carr. Stroud's a very good quarterback. And I think that matters, especially in this league. That's why I would tend to tell you, you're correct. In the past, that's a label you'd use for the Texans. The team that's really owned that label, Jake, the last 3 years has been the Jaguars. They're the team where it's like, this is their year, and then they fall apart.
Every year, right?
Yes. So, no, I don't. I think it's a fair point, but that's not the lens I view it anymore. I already talked about enough smack about DeMeco Ryans and the way they played that draft to get Stroud and how I thought it was a mess and I wasn't sure how it was going to work out. Not that Stroud wouldn't work, but just the Texans being the Texans.
Here's the thing,
I think
Jimmy,
that's behind them now.
Here's the thing about the Texans that you have to like. You don't have to like the franchise, right? But you got to respect this fact. You got to respect the fact that the Houston Texans, there's two kinds of franchises. There's franchises that either say, you know what, like, we like what we have, we're going to stand pat, and we're not going to get aggressive. We like draft capital. Colts lead the NFL in draft capital.
Yes.
They like, the Colts should hang a banner underneath the one that's like AFC wild card participant 1987 or whatever it is. They should have one that just says 4 straight years draft capital leader, right? Loading up on 5th rounders, baby.
Cap space.
Bring it on.
Yes.
That's right. We got cap space. Bring it on. And then there's other and sometimes that works. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's what you have to do. I get it. But then there are franchises like the Houston Texans. I'm not saying they do it all the time, but in that year where they just said, you know what, we're going for it. They make a trade. They move up. They take two picks inside the top 10, and they're like, let's go. And they gave up stuff to do that. But sometimes you got to take chances. Sometimes you got to take risks. Sometimes you got, Kenny Rogers said it. You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, right?
No one to walk away, no one to run, baby.
That's exactly right.
Indeed.
And the Texans, that's why they're in the position that they are in. But CJ Stroud,
like they're
from the get-go, CJ Stroud from the very get-go came out of the NFL womb ready to go and has played well. And it reminded me of another guy that there are a few athletes that you look at, and as a rookie, they are a sensation, and they take the world by storm. And it made me think about one of them that was the case, and I got a chance to kind of look back and dwell on what was a super fun time with somebody coming on literally like a tsunami, like a phenom that just kind of captured everybody, which is what makes sports fun. And I'll tell you about that guy next. Is admittedly probably somewhat esoteric to my age demographic, although with the World Series upon us and the Dodgers a participant, it becomes continued in its, I guess, relevance or timeliness, unfortunately. But there are few players in sports that hit the landscape like what we saw 43 years ago. And let me explain. Sports is so unique because sports is about, just the passion of teams and the following of teams. And, John Fanta said it really well yesterday on this show. You folks that are listening are Colts fans, you're Pacers fans, you're Reds fans, you're IU fans or Purdue fans, all of it, right? Notre Dame fans. And as I always say, we go to games and we get excited because oftentimes we're thinking about possibilities of something. You're sitting there watching a game and the Colts have a team on the ropes and your brain starts racing of what happens if they win this game, then da-da-da, and then you fall in love with that scenario. So you're wanting to see it unfold before your very eyes. And then sometimes just a phenom comes along that becomes transcendent of sport. And the whole country gets on board with it because of the character of something or the caricature of something. William Perry comes to mind. The refrigerator. Everybody's wearing sweatshirts that says the fridge, and everybody's imitating the fridge, and he's like the number one Halloween outfit that year. Linsanity comes to mind. I mean, everybody's like, man, did you see Jeremy Lin? There was a 3-week stretch there where he's hitting game-winning shot after game-winning shot, and the whole country is on board with Linsanity. And usually it's because somebody comes along that is atypical of what we think of at their particular position or skill set. A big, huge, overweight defensive lineman that's got the footwork and the mobility to score from the goal line on Monday Night Football and spike the football. A very short, we're not used to obviously seeing the fact that he was Asian was unique, but diminutive just in size alone. Point guard that's out there hitting game-winning shots from not a marquee college program. Those things jump out at us. And in the summer of 1981, which was, you're talking about a strike-shortened season, and Major League Baseball was at a different place than it is now. But when the LA Dodgers said, you know what, we're going to take this young player from Mexico who had a very short time in the minor leagues, Fernando Valenzuela, and we're just going to give him the ball and see what he can do. And he has, he's kind of a pudgy guy. He had kind of like a mullet, almost like a bowl cut mullet. It wasn't even a mullet. It was more like a bowl cut. And he had this unique wind-up where when he would rock back, his eyes would roll up where he's looking at the underside of the bill of his cap. And all of a sudden, everybody, and his name's Fernando, right? Fernando Valenzuela, the bull. And he goes out. The Dodgers win 2-0, and he gets a second start. Then he gets a third start. Then he gets a fourth start. And he's on this tear where in his first 8 starts, he gets 5 shutouts. An ERA of 0.5. 0.5! And the guy looks like he couldn't run like a 40-yard dash. And every kid in America is trying to do the eye roll. Every kid is trying to get his rookie card. And back in those days, it was like, well, which one is his rookie card? Is it the first card that came out, or is it the one that says Future Stars? Or is it the one that says Rated Rookie? But I'm not kidding you when I tell you that for that summer that Fernando Valenzuela hit the scene for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and it was a different era for the romanticism of baseball, but he became literally a darling to everyone. And people loved it. And it crossed and connected dots to so many different bridges, and probably you could get into a whole different talk show about what it meant for the transcendent nature of not only baseball but also cultural relations, and a player of, Mexican background playing in Southern California, but also that being introduced to kids in Indianapolis, Indiana, for, of all places. But he handled it just brilliantly, and seemingly was like naive to or unaware of this fanaticism and this instant love that was showered upon him, and just became one of those characters that you couldn't help but love. And then he left the Dodgers, obviously played a number of different places, threw no-hitters, came back to the Dodgers and became a beloved member of that franchise because he was a member of their Spanish broadcast team, but I think was just always an ambassador for the franchise itself. He was removed is probably the wrong word. He took a step back from those broadcast responsibilities in the last couple of months, and there became a lot of conversation and rumors and concern about his health because he had lost a significant amount of weight. It was determined in the home stretch of the Dodgers season that from a health standpoint, he could no longer do their broadcasts. And last night, the Dodgers making the announcement that Fernando Valenzuela had passed away at the age of 63. He's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. He's obviously in the Dodgers Hall of Fame and had his number retired and everything else. But I realize that to a lot of people, they might just hear the name Fernando Valenzuela and be like, yeah, it's an unusual name, so I always remembered it. But I just always think it's cool when you can find a player that becomes an ambassador, not just for their franchise and their sport, but unknowingly and unwillingly, but yet totally accepting the love that becomes upon them. He was not a guy that came in as a number one draft pick. He was not a guy that came in like Johnny Manziel walking across the stage, flashing money signs, and there was storylines swirling around him. He was just a guy that could throw a screwball like nobody's business. I don't even know if people do that anymore. That batters couldn't hit. Fans loved it. And what was great about it is while we enjoyed the ride, he seemingly just loved being on it too. And that's the kind of thing in sport that we love. So tip of the cap and job well done to now the late, but for my generation, certainly appreciated Fernando Valenzuela. Pacers season gets underway tonight. You heard J&B talking about it. It is kind of a must-win because you want to get off to the right start. And the big thing that I always say about the NBA season and for the Pacers, I tell Shannon this when we go to games and they'll win a big game. You know, I'm trying to think of some, Boston comes in and the Pacers beat them, or they win in Boston, something like that. And I always say that is an awesome win, but you can't negate it by dropping a game that you're supposed to get. And this is probably a game they're supposed to get. So you want to go in there and just take care of business. So I agree with John in that regard. I mean, you got a tough opening start of the schedule. You got to go to New York from here. You want to get off to the right start, and therefore you want to make sure that you get one in Detroit, who I think has added some pieces but still has a long way to go. But joining us now in the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, he is, of course, from the Indianapolis Star, talking about our friend Dustin
Dopirak,
who joins us now. Dustin, you are, presumably, up in Detroit, correct?
I am driving to Detroit.
Oh,
I am currently in somewhere in northeastern Indiana on Interstate 69.
Okay, so then you're going to go to Fort Wayne, and then you go through Defiance and Delphus, where I just was last week, and then you go to Toledo, and then you go up, right? Is that the direction they got you going?
I'm pretty sure that's it. I'm on. I got an exit coming up on 24 East is where Google Maps is taking me. So
yeah, okay, that's right.
So right. I've made that move. I've gone through Defiance before, so I know of what you speak. So I think that's what I've got coming here.
That is correct. It's right there on 24. All right, let's begin with this. Player this year on the Pacers roster that you are most intrigued to see what they can do at the outset of the year versus last year?
I guess Jarris Walker. Basically that's my big mystery for tonight. Is he on the second unit or not? At the end of the day, that is the big intrigue, I think, for me in terms of how this is going to go. Because I do think, obviously Ben Shepherd played really well, and certainly was the reason they won that preseason game against the Hornets. Not that preseason things matter, but he reminded everybody that that's who Ben Shepherd is. So obviously Walker's the guy with the higher ceiling, with more size, and obviously the player that they're more invested in. And I think if you play Walker in the rotation, you could still say, look, like Ben Shepherd, there's going to be minutes for you. There's going to be opportunities. There's going to be times when somebody's not playing well, and we're going to need you available. So don't think you're out of anything. So I think you start with the younger, more talented guy. But we'll see if that's the case. And so I want to see basically what Walker looks like when he is, when he does have a rotation role. We've obviously seen him use a bunch of different ways. Saw him get a couple minutes late last year. Obviously saw Summer League was really tailored toward him, and he got a lot of options here, in the preseason. Getting a lot of that work at the three on the second unit. So is that going to be the case when games count? I think is sort of my big question. What does that look like for him? I mean, I think I'm interested in what they are collectively, just because I feel like they obviously didn't play well, especially the first unit guys did not play well against Charlotte. Didn't have a necessarily great preseason overall. Are they going to come up and be woken up by the fact that these games count, or are they going to, I think, to your initial point, are they going to look at Detroit like a team they should get? Because when they look at teams like somebody they should beat, they tend to play down to their competition, and that might be a recipe for disaster here if Detroit is in fact better than they have been in the recent past.
Okay, so Dustin, when you look at the second unit, the second unit that you're wanting to see if Jarris Walker breaks in and becomes a permanent part of, right now, if you look at it, the second unit you would presume would be who? The first five guys.
McConnell, Mathurin, Walker. Sorry.
Oh, hang on.
McConnell.
Now, do you need to listen to the Waze gal? I don't want you ended up in the wrong direction here, Dustin. Do you need to follow what she's saying?
I'm good. I've got it up on the screen here too. She didn't really need to tell me. We're good.
Okay. All right, McConnell, Mathurin.
McConnell, Mathurin, Walker, Toppin, Jackson if he's healthy for tonight. Wiseman if he isn't.
Okay, so you did not mention Shepherd there, right?
No, I would think he's the 11th guy, and basically it's a question of is it Shepherd or is it Walker? Again, I think Shepherd will get minutes. I think I think also Rick Carlisle views Ben Shepherd as the guy that you play when you're trying to send a message to somebody else that this guy is going to give me what I expect. I know he will, and if you don't, he's going to play for you. So I think that's my initial thought. And really my initial question is it Walker or is it Shepherd on opening night, and what does that look like? But it would be between those two guys.
Pacers beat writer for the Indy Star, Dustin Dopirak, is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Dustin, we talked about the run-it-back philosophy for the Pacers this offseason. They'll have returned every player that played at least 100 postseason minutes last playoffs. Of that group, 6 of them are 25 years of age or under. That's a lot of untapped potential. When you look at that group specifically, youngsters on this roster, who is the most untapped and who is most likely to take that leap forward in the youth movement they still have on this roster?
That's a good question. I think there's a couple different ways to answer that. I think for one thing, obviously you keep looking at Mathurin and saying, there's more there. And he's obviously produced a lot already. You've seen just what he can be as a scorer. Have that guy with a more integrated group that's good. How's he going to fit, basically, and say, okay, is he going to be more efficient this year? He was pretty efficient last year. He was much more efficient as a second-year player than he was as a rookie. You kind of got a sense of where does he fit in, I guess, is the bigger question. But for I think Nembhard is the other one where I think you're going to see a noticeable statistical change, because I think in the playoffs last season, they really kind of stressed on the importance of him looking to score, and just by his nature, by being sort of a point guard, by being like a point guard by trade, he's always thought facilitate first. Going all the way back to when he was a kid and he was playing, a couple, leagues up. He was trying to just facilitate for other guys and make everybody else happy, and they really drove home the point with him in the playoffs last year. Hey, Halliburton and Siakam are going to get a lot of attention. Someone has to take advantage of the other matchups. You're going to get single covered, and you're going to be defended by somebody who's down their list of best defenders, and you got to make them pay. You got to make those guys pay for guarding you and using one of their worst defenders on you. So go take advantage of them. And I think that woke something up in him. I think he thinks of the game differently now. He sees angles that he didn't necessarily see before, because he just didn't have the same go get a bucket mindset, because he was just always thinking about kind of deferring to Halliburton, deferring to other guys, just kind of being there more as a facilitator. As he thinks of himself as a scorer, I think he sees opportunities that he hasn't seen before. You saw that, I think, a little bit in preseason action, where you really saw him look to go get his shot in the mid-range. He's a really good mid-range shooter, and he's really good at getting there. He's really slippery getting through kind of the cracks in the defense from the top of the key to spots 8 to 10 feet out and making those shots. So I think you're going to see a lot of that potential come out this year in terms of what he looks like a scorer, and I think it's going to add a significant amount for them as an offense on that first unit. Is him being a guy that's not just there. He obviously is there to move the basketball, and everybody's there to move the ball. But as a guy that is a scoring threat, I think you'll see a dramatic improvement from him in that regard.
Dustin, do you think Dustin Dopirak is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line? Do you think that there's any, I'm intrigued as we're talking about, we're intrigued by Benedict Mathurin and where he acclimates and blends in with these rotations. And the Pacers are running back what was a very, very good run for them a year ago, but it was a run that did not include Benedict Mathurin when it came down to the brass tacks. I'm fascinated with how he molds back in and works back into and causes a seamless transition back into rotations. But do you think his teammates are equally intrigued by that?
Yes. I think, because that touches on a very interesting topic that I find I'm only getting kind of the surface of. It's fascinating the little messages that you catch from them about him. And not in a bad way, but it is definitely known that Ben wants to go get his shots.
Right.
You go back to the press conference after they won that skills competition at All-Stars, and Ben said it was better to win the team competition and then be the MVP for the rookie sophomore deal. And Miles and Tyrese were just like, "Cat, you're lying. There's no way you think that." We know better, but they know he's super talented. I think Halliburton had a quote, said something in one of the first days of practice, and he called him, he's one of the most motivated, hard-headed guys I know, I think is the way he put it. And so they know he's really good, and I think they can sense that he's taking seriously the idea of weaving in. They know it's not natural for him. Halliburton especially who's, obviously basketball IQ and emotional IQ is off the charts, knows that Ben's just like his deep down desire is to be a one-on-one scorer, just to go take it to people. Like that's how he's wired. He loves doing that. I mean, like he was competitions in practice. Like they know that's how he's wired, and they know that they have to kind of rewire him a little bit to make him integrate into an offense. But they know the skill is there because they know when it's one-on-one, when it's him versus them, they can't stop him. If it's a one-on-one situation and there's no other teammates and it's just you trying to stop Ben Mathurin, he's the hardest guy on that team to stop. So that has to be, it has to be intriguing because that is a talent, and it is not always easy to integrate because he's wired that way, just to go get buckets and to set somebody up, to crossover dribble, to try to get him go one way and then go this way, and just thinking how you're going to find space to go cook a guy. It's different to weave that into an offense that is so built on ball movement and quick decisions and all that. But I think they still believe they can do it. I think they still believe that it's possible. And I think they believe that he's getting better, that it's a process. But I think you look at his efficiency numbers and you can see that they improved year over year. And I think also, I think they could sense that he got the idea that, hey, you guys did this without me. Well, that must mean you're pretty good, and that must mean I gotta find a way to work my way into what fits. And Mathurin said so. So I think. So the bottom line is, I think yes. I mean, I think you obviously touched on the idea that there is an awareness of this group that he is a guy that likes to go one-on-one. Just is wired that way. Has always been wired that way, and that it is a difficult fit. But I think they believe it's possible because they just see an immense amount of talent. They see a huge work ethic. They see a guy who's trying harder than he ever has to fit in. I mean, the whole baking thing is relevant. Like it sounds weird and dumb to be talking about it, but I thought it was just fascinating that was the thing that he brought up, that I felt like I really needed to connect with these guys, so I started bringing cookies on road trips. It's weird to say that is something that's relevant, but it tells you something. I think I heard from somebody in the organization say, I've talked to him, I feel like Matherin's talked to more people around the team this year than he has in the past. Like he just is trying harder to get more connected with this group because he sees the relevance in it. And again, I think they see too much talent to let go of.
Dustin, a year ago, regardless of how they feel or how the average Pacer fan feels about the defensive ability of this team, offensively speaking, they were an absolute joy to watch on a nightly basis. They were a near historic offense. It culminates in the best team shooting NBA playoff performance the league's ever seen against the Knicks in the closeout in Game 7. When you look at this group, conventional wisdom would tell you that another year connected together, Pascal Siakam a full offseason together, and the youth movement we already mentioned, they're going to be even better than they were a year ago offensively. Do you see capabilities for them to reach the historical proportions some people think they can from a scoring standpoint, or is it fair to expect some regression from this group?
I think there'll be a little regression by virtue of everybody knows they're coming, and they're going to start in a different place, and it's also didn't have Pascal yet, and you had Buddy Hield, and that's worth noting because you did have a guy that was creating a lot of gravity on his own as a shooter, and they don't, they're going to have to kind of, the outside shooting is going to come by committee. Like they don't have one guy who does that. Halliburton is probably their best three-point shooter when he's on. Obviously, he had a pretty significant slump last year that really held his numbers back overall. I mean, I think you take out that kind of middle section around, February, early March, I think it was, where he was really cold. I think his numbers ended up pretty okay if you take that out, but there was a pretty rough stretch in there. But he's your point guard and he's your best movement shooter, and so that's a weird space to be in terms of maximizing what's there. So it is going to be a touch clunkier than I think it was at the beginning of last year. And I think it's also just teams are going to key on them. Teams are going to want to defend them. It's going to be a point of motivation through the course of an 82-game season when you play the most potent offense in the league, and you come in and you say, I really want to shut these guys down. Like, it matters to me. Like, as teams look at something to motivate themselves when it's, the middle of January and you've been doing this already for a couple of months and you played 30, 40 games to, make everyone matter. That's one way that you can motivate yourself and saying, like, these guys are this good, we're going to stop them. So I think that it will be more difficult by virtue of the attention. I think they also go in knowing, okay, how do you make Halliburton's life hard where you got to send two bodies at him as much as you can. So that forces the Pacers to adjust, and it made life a little bit harder toward the end of last year to keep those numbers as high as they were. Now they've adjusted to that. They know it's coming, and that'll make a difference. So it's just going to be hard to match. I mean, like, it was historic at the end of the day. I mean, it was, I think, the sixth highest leading scoring team of all time, and no one had eclipsed them since the Doug Moe Nuggets of the early 80s. I mean, I think those teams did it like 3 times, scored more points than that Pacers team did, somewhere between like 80 and 84. But you're talking 40 years, of basketball at past, and including the Showtime Lakers and the 90s Bulls and all that. I mean, like, those teams did not score as much as the Pacers did. They are really, really good as far as putting points on the board. It's like, if they drop a point or two, if they go down to like 120 a game from like 120, 1.4 or whatever they were, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me to see some small aggression. But I still expect them to be, at worst, a top 3 scoring team in the league.
Dustin, occasionally and I'm probably annoying for it, occasionally I will recommend or suggest or give little tips to your colleagues at the Indy Star of stories that I think would be cool to write. Here's the one for you. You're going to be late to the game tonight because I need you to pull over in Defiance, Ohio. You ready? I'm looking up notable people, famous people from Defiance, Ohio, because I know that Sam Hornish Jr., the 2006 Indy 500 champion, is from Defiance, Ohio. So too Greg Campy, who is the head basketball coach at Oakland, Defiance, Ohio. But then I'm reading this, Kevin Bacon from Defiance, Ohio, and I thought, oh, well, that's exciting. It's not the same one. It's some Ohio State senator who happens to have the same name. But how about this? I need you to do this story. Alan Francis of Defiance, Ohio, currently lives there. He is listed as a 24-time Horseshoe World Champion. Now, I need you to find Alan to find out, A, if this is even true, B, if there really is a Horseshoe World Championship, and C, to find out if he's actually good in hand grenades also. I need to know that. I need to know what the horseshoe competition is. That's your assignment. Screw the game. Go find Alan, and there's your assignment. All right?
All right. Tell him that he's not getting a gamer tonight, okay?
Put it into the Waze right now, and that lady will tell you exactly how to find Alan. And don't forget, even if you don't get the full story, you got to make sure. You got to make sure to do the whole story, because close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, right? So there you go.
That's true. Exactly.
All right.
Very
travel safely, Dustin. We appreciate the time. We'll talk to you soon. All right.
Much appreciated. Thanks so much, Jake.
From the Indy Star, that's our friend Dustin
Dopirak
on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Do you guys think that I have emotional intelligence? He said that Tyrese Halliburton has on-court and emotional intelligence. Would you list my intelligence as? I don't think I have any intelligence, but if I did, would it be emotional?
Eddie, have we worked together long enough with him to be able to answer a question like that?
It's been over a year, right?
I mean, I've worked with him longer than that, but
fair.
So what do you think, Eddie? Do I have emotion? Am I in touch with my emotions?
I would say so, yes.
Would you read that?
I mean, you did say you were moody.
Hold on. Would you read that as being in touch with your own emotions, or being able to read the room when others are going through something emotionally?
Well, I don't notably care about the second part.
Okay, then I would say we know enough about your emotional intelligence.
Would that make me emotionally immature?
Yeah, well,
emotionally naive?
Emotionally humble, I think, is the word we're looking for. Yeah, the humility of your emotional intelligence.
Look, I love me some me, exactly. Right? What does that count as, right?
Internal emotional intelligence. IEI.
I would like, here's the thing, and maybe I'm guilty of this. I'd like to think that I can read a room, but I also think that people that can't read the room are the last ones to realize they can't read a room. They think they can read a room, but they can't read a room, right? I'd like to think I can read a room, but I think there are times maybe after the fact where I realize I've misread the room. For the most part, I like to think I can read a room.
Does it keep you up at night those times, or you just move about
Everything
your day?
Keeps me up at
Well,
night.
I know, but like that specifically. Is that one that sits with you, or you're like,
yeah, there are a couple of times where I'm like, I probably would like to a do over there. I didn't realize. I'll give you a good example, and you tell me if this is not reading the room.
All right.
It's a terrible situation, but I'll tell you. I went to a service once for somebody who had passed, okay? So I'm not making any light of that.
Sure.
But I was seated towards the back, and they had, this is usually in the other way around, but they actually had a receiving line and a reception, like a calling, if you will, after the celebration of life. So they had a celebration of life, and then after that was when they had the receiving line for the family.
Okay.
So the celebration of life ended. I happened to be seated towards the back, so I then went into the area where the receiving line was and was like the first one to walk in, and there's the family. So I go up and I exchange my, condolences and thoughts. And they had made a comment or whatever, oh, it's good to see you. Last time we saw you was such and such or whatever. And so I was just kind of standing to the side, and it's kind of that awkward. Those are always kind of awkward, right?
Yes.
Even if it's somebody that you know better than anybody in the world, you never kind of know just the small talk of it. So I continued the small talk, and then finally, because I was standing where I couldn't see around the bend, and that's when they said, well, listen, unfortunately, there are other people we need to talk to as well. And I turned around and looked, and the line had already formed, and I had no idea because I was standing kind of off to the side where you couldn't see it. And I mean, it was probably 20 seconds. But I felt terrible, and I felt like I couldn't read the room. And I've always wanted to go a do-over on that.
No, I don't think you're at fault there. If you couldn't see the line, how would you know?
Well, you should have known, right? But I really, in all honesty, what I felt like was that I was trying to, keep things light or keep conversation going for them until everyone arrived. I just didn't realize that they had all, in fact, arrived. But
I was really hoping that story was going to have poor joke small talk landed in there, you try to
I didn't go that far, thankfully, right?
Yeah,
I wasn't a total George Costanza.
Sure.
But again, I think there are people that's a good question about emotional intelligence. It probably does mean reading the emotions of other people, right? And there is a responsibility whether you're a quarterback. That's one of the hard things about having a young quarterback like an Anthony Richardson or a young team leader like a Tyrese Halliburton, in the fact that you need somebody who can also understand on the floor and just in practices and whatever else what the mood is of the team, whether or not the team needs a lift or needs to be rechanneled or refocused. That's obviously the coach's job, but you are, as a franchise player, an extension of the coach. And if you're Anthony Richardson, for example, and you're trying to read the room of the Colts, you actually probably now are not only reading a room that has a new name, but you're also reading a room that might have a little more optimism.
Yeah.
And I'll explain what I mean by both of those in just over 5. If you were just joining us on this Hump Day Wednesday,
where the hell have you been?
Thank you, Eddie. If you are, you did not hear it perhaps at the beginning of the show, so we will do what we in the business call re-racking it at the halfway point here. Mike Chappell had the media room at the Colts complex on the west side named for him. It is the Mike Chappell Media Room in honor of his covering the Colts since the time they arrived in Indianapolis. And it was cool that they had Conrad Brunner and Bill Benner and Mark Ambrogi and a lot of the good guys from the Star, longtime people. I'm not sure if Donna Eggert was there, but people that worked with Chappell along the way were there for the honor. And then Shane Steichen made the announcement that DeForest Buckner is now in the 21-day practice window. Buckner celebrated that by, and I'll explain what that means in just a moment. Buckner celebrated that by bringing Tyquan Lewis out onto the stage dressed as the Oregon Duck. I don't think it was the official outfit. I noticed a slight discrepancy in the bill.
You think that he got the hookup, though, from someone with connections? You know what I mean? Like, you think there's some authenticity to it, or you think it's all a custom job?
Nah, I think it probably was a rental.
All right.
Probably had it. Although, I mean, he played at Oregon, right?
Yeah.
DeForest Buckner. So, but they obviously made a wager over the
what if he
game
had it
from
in
a
his
couple
house?
weeks ago.
What if he just had it, like just a spare duck costume, just in case?
Well, what if that was part of your parting gift?
That gets into an HBO
I understand.
documentary.
I understand it does. Let's try to keep it in the PG realm there.
Maybe it was part of his recruiting process. He gets to borrow the outfit from time to time for wagers. I'm not sure. But Buckner now, by being out of when he went on injured reserve and the injured reserve that he was on, what that means is after a certain period of time, he is then eligible for a 21-day practice, essentially evaluation of where he is window. And at any point during that 21 days, the Colts can elevate him to the active roster. If they do not elevate him in those 21 days, then he goes on the IR for the season and he's done for the year. But if he, and I think what will happen is he is going to be elevated to the active roster. When that takes place, somebody who is on the active roster will have to be either relegated to the practice squad or flat out released. That's where they stand there. Shane Steichen also said that Jonathan Taylor will practice this week and that he anticipates Buckner practicing now that he's back into the mix. We don't know with any certainty what that means in terms of when he or either of those two players will return to game action. It is obviously anticipated that the two of them could play against the Houston Texans, but we don't know yet whether that's the case. I'll tell you, we make so much about Jonathan Taylor. Reality is, Jimmy, especially, this defense needs a jolt. And I know that people are down on Gus Bradley and they're down on just the defense in general, but for certain, DeForest Buckner does give them some sort of a lift, and they obviously at this point desperately need it. Well, thank you, Eddie. You enjoy that, don't you?
Yeah, it's my favorite sounder.
Is it officially a hotkey now?
Not yet.
No, it hasn't graduated yet?
Not yet.
All right, we'll get into that later during the break. No, look, he is...
if you don't mind me saying so, that actually sounds kind of cool. Can you do that again?
Sounds like a Mario Kart sound.
That's my voice doing that?
Yes.
Okay, one more time if you could. I never realized. I hate my own voice, but that sound right there, I'm not going to lie to you, kind of arouses me.
So you're not going to make it a text tone then in that case. That'd be bad.
Yeah.
Considering how many spam texts and calls
I'd
you
rather
get.
enjoy the sound effects that I can make. I had no idea of this skill.
Well, you have a new potential...
this is part of my new emotional intelligence and growth.
There it is.
Right?
DeForest Buckner, when you look at game records, and he gets lost in the last 4 or 5 years when you had guys like Aaron Donald. I already mentioned Chris
Does he
Jones
get lost
today.
in DeForest?
He does get lost in DeForest. Indeed, I walked into that. That's my fault. That's on me. Max Crosby, other just game wreckers, Aiden Hutchinson, guys that are takeover defensive linemen that are able to leave their impact on a game. But you cannot forget about DeForest Buckner because he, even though might not be at the highest level of the sport, he is still an elite level pass rusher, an elite presence, and a game wrecker within what they want to do in the trenches. And that's what Gus Bradley and Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard sold to the fan base to start the season, that even though they spoke outwardly with belief about their corners, they were going to win and generate pressure up front. That's what this defense is built to do. You've seen them try to get creative and disguise things with blitzes and try to, produce your own pass rush, and it has not been fruitful for the Colts. Getting him back and getting him back for this stretch on the road against the Texans and on the road against the Vikings, at home against the Bills, on the road against the Jets, and at home against the Lions. You can say that maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse too much for the Colts and their AFC South title hopes if they lose on Sunday. I'll still stand by that. I think the Texans are a better team in many areas, especially the one that matters the most in the league, which is the quarterback position. I think if the Colts lose on Sunday, their hopes for the South are done. But if you want to zoom out and not be so alarmist.
Hold on. Do you know what that sounds like?
Indeed.
Eddie, one more time. We're going to do a zoom out. Eddie, go ahead.
I can't. I'm sorry.
What?
I'm saving a file, and the file is
it's a glitch within the
Are
program.
we doing a
where
quick
you can't
zoom
double
out
save.
or a slow zoom out? Which one are we doing, Jimmy?
slow.
We're doing a slow pan or slow zoom. That stretch,
Thank you.
coming
Thank
out
you, Eddie.
alive of that stretch,
Mhm.
you could argue decide your playoff hopes. Like, yes, there's a light at the end of the tunnel,
That
Jake, that
stretch
you've been
sounds
talking
like
about.
this, by the way.
It's a longer one. We need variations. Eddie, does he need to re-record all of them, or are you able to manipulate just that one sound to make it longer
Oh,
and
that's
shorter?
an excellent question.
See, Jimmy, when he did the slow one, you talked over him, so I can't use the slow one that he did.
Okay, you just wanted to. All right. Anyway, Vikings, Bills, Jets, Lions, and then the Texans to start this whole stretch. I said 2 and 3.
So you talk over him.
I said 2 and 3. Slow zoom. It sounds like a video game sounder, that one does.
Well, it does until you started talking.
I didn't realize that we were still trying to cut the audio. I submitted the idea after
Now
the
all
fact.
we need is me trying to do it and you in the
All right.
background going,
Prepare to qualify.
You said I was being too.
Prepare to qualify.
that's right.
I was ready that time. You said I was being maybe too sudden with the AFC
I think what
South
you're being
hopes.
with this whole thing is slightly childish, to be honest with you.
I'm being childish.
I think that's what's happening here. I think you found something you like, and now all of a sudden you won't let go of it, and the audience is getting frustrated because of the immaturity that's being displayed.
That would be the emotional intelligence if you're looking in the mirror is what's happening with that
I'm
explanation.
not reading the room.
In third person, yeah.
Right?
Indeed.
I'm clearly not reading the room in any way, shape, or form.
No.
The room is like the Iliad and the Odyssey. I'm reading it, but I'm not necessarily comprehending it. Okay, as you are, Jimmy.
Am I being hyperbolic in your mind about 2 and 3 or worse playoff hopes are on life support for the Colts with this 5-game stretch? Do you think I'm being too extreme there? Because you've mentioned the light at the end of the tunnel that happens after this stretch.
It does. If they were to go 2 and 3 in this 5-game stretch, that puts them then at what, 6 and 6? Is that right? Is that where they'd be?
You said 2 and 3?
Yes.
That would be accurate. With a very easy back-end schedule, too.
2 and 3 is the bar for me. If you
I
go
think
worse
they
than
would-
that,
You know, in the AFC, I don't know if 10 gets you in. 11 probably does. So they would have to go. They would have to run the table at that point. The question becomes, what does it do to the one thing that we don't know is how they respond. I hate to make light of what we've been making light of here, like the emotional intelligence. If they go 2 and 3, it depends on if that 2 and 3 coming out of it, you never know what happens to a locker room. If guys are going in different directions, some guys are checked out, some guys are like, why are we starting this guy, that guy, whatever else. If they come out of it and they collectively rally together and they do, there's no reason to believe they can't go 5-0 based on who they're playing. But so long as they physically are healthy, it's, to me, the big obstacle then just becomes whether or not guys are still invested and dialed in. And you kind of don't know that. You just don't know until you go through it, right? This group feels like they would not be checked out. I think everybody knows what this year has been about and is on board with that. So I don't know that having a struggle like that would derail this particular group.
you also took care of business against 2 really bad teams. I know you lost to Jacksonville, but
True.
you took care
I mean,
of
they're
business
gonna have
against
to
the
play better.
Titans and the Dolphins. And that's why the light is so prevalent, because you still play the Titans, the Jaguars, and the Giants, to name a few on the schedule.
I saw something amongst a fan group and a fan base in Central Indiana today involving a big-time story I've held it in long enough. I've held it on long enough, and I've got to just say, you know what? We're all going to sit around, and we're going to have a fireside chat. We're going to have a fireside chat, and I'm going to make everybody better for it, I promise. but it's a conversation that we need to have. We've waited long enough. Today's about emotional intelligence. We need to have it. And so brace yourself, but I think we'll all be better for it in a minute. I'm going to preface this small rant by saying this. I do totally appreciate everybody that listens to this show and interacts on social media, and I also understand that, different strokes for different folks. But I honestly do think that this is a conversation somewhat flippantly and somewhat seriously that we need to have. I don't know if this begins with travel sports. I have mentioned before, and I won't get into this whole rant, but like the travel basketball circuit and the travel baseball circuit, some of the parents that are involved in that don't realize it. But if you're like notably somebody of pretty significant means and your kid is like an average athlete and they're playing on a travel team and they're on the team and you're like a big sponsor for the team and your kid doesn't play a whole lot, you're kind of getting fleeced, just so you know. Your kid's on the team because they need somebody to sponsor and pay for the team for the other members of the team that are better players, but don't necessarily have across the board the travel budget. And then you have coaches in those travel leagues that are doing it because they are like these, not all, but you have these sycophant coaches that are doing it because they, in a very weird and perverse way, want to like buddy up to 14-year-olds just in case they happen to become 20-year-olds that are draft picks and they can walk across the stage with them. It's very odd. And if you don't believe me, I'll send you screen grabs of the constant direct messages and emails I get from, and it's younger and younger, and everybody and their brother. The one thing you learn when you're a radio host or a television commentator of sports, the one thing you learn is that 94.6% of the population has a nephew, son, grandson, or neighbor that is a nationally ranked fourth-grade basketball player who just got done with a tournament where they're in nationals. It is the most absurdly, like, you folks are 90% of you are completely getting fleeced because somebody is making money off of this travel circuit that you think is actually this thing of prominence. And I'm like, yeah, I got news for you. There's a group of fourth graders in Pocatello that also think they're the 8th best point guard in the country. And rankings in general mean nothing, thank you, Eddie, because until everybody's gone through puberty. As I've said a million times before, really dominant 7th grade basketball players oftentimes grow into becoming really nice backup JV point guards because they're 5'11 and 195 as a 7th grader, and then they're 5'11 and 202 as a sophomore. And everybody else has caught up. That's just the reality. But I digress from all of that. I need to take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath, Jake.
That was very emotionally intelligent of you to take
a
that
deep breath.
Thank you.
That was good.
Earlier, somebody sent this on the X Post Twitter to me, so I was tagged on it, so I don't feel as bad. I'm not going to say the name of who read it. Probably a good dude. I don't know. And it says, I'm driving out to Greenfield today to hear Braylon Mullins get booed off his own high school gym. Have fun out east. The first response from another Indiana fan says, I've already done the standard unfollows and mutes. He no longer exists to me. Okay. For those that don't know, by the way, Braylon Mullins is a nationally ranked player from Greenfield who is making his announcement. He might have already made it. I don't know. Indiana, Connecticut, and North Carolina, the 3 schools that he is down to, and it is anticipated that he is going to announce today that he is going to the University of Connecticut. Okay? Now, I don't mean to be judgmental, but I'm going to be judgmental. I don't mean to be an elitist, but I'm going to sound like an elitist. I can't possibly fathom. Look, I'm a Clemson football fan, for example. And I like, Indiana. I went to the Purdue game Friday night. I had fun at Purdue. I like college football a great deal. I can't possibly fathom having an emotional investment or even taking time out of my day to go watch a 17-year-old or 18-year-old person that I don't even know make an announcement about their decision of what they want to do with their immediate future and feeling butthurt over it. What world do we live in where people are taking pause from their everyday life to make judgment on a young person based on that person's decision on where they want to go to college? Who cares? Okay, great. What I'm saying is this. I understand wanting, like, wanting your program to get the best players so that they can compete in games. Fine. But Romeo Langford announced he was going to Indiana, and you would have thought literally that they were holding an announcement because that somebody had just found a cure for like an incurable disease, or I mean, it was like this hour-long procedure, and people pilgrimaged, and like fat guys waited out in line for 2 hours in sub-zero temperatures to get autographs from a guy. So that what? So that 3 years later you could be like, I have an autograph of the backup point guard of the Maine Red Claws. Great. Recruiting is such an inexact science to begin with. The biggest players and the best commitments, quote unquote, that Indiana's ever received are probably what? Delray Brooks, Romeo Langford, Noah Vonleh. Okay. Did they change the trajectory of the program? I don't know. Calvert Chaney's a pretty good player. He was the 6th best player in his recruiting class. A.J. Guyton was a pretty good player. I don't know if anybody knew who he was. It's a totally inexact science. But my point being this, when you are a young person, you are, in later high school, encouraged to start beginning and exploring the areas that are going to best position you for your own personal growth. Whether that means you want to go far away from home because it gives you the most money, whether it means you want to go far away from home because it gets you out of a spotlight, maybe you want to go far away from home because home isn't great where you live. I have no idea. But we are encouraging people to go. College is supposed to be about, or just young adulthood is supposed to be about, going out and testing yourself, maybe getting out of your comfort zone to better yourself individually. And the fact that there are people that have no relation to, no interaction with young people that feel that those young people are indebted to already established adults to alter their own path for the appeasement of adults in general is the most ridiculously absurd and perverse thing on planet Earth. And quite frankly, I look at it and I can't fathom it. I remember when Deron Davis announced that he was going to Indiana in Colorado. He was at some high school in Denver. And some guy from Indiana that lived out in Denver was like driving, like videotaping himself driving there wearing the candy striped sweatpants and everything else. And this poor kid is just holding a press conference in his high school cafeteria with his high school basketball team, his parents, his former Cub Scout leader, and one guy he's never met who's a transplant that lives in, Highlands Ranch, Colorado, that's there to like wave the flag and yell hoo-hoo Hoosiers. And everybody there is thinking to themselves, who is this dude? Who brought this guy in? I just think it's weird. I have no idea where Braylon Mullins is going to go to college. I don't even know if he's already announced it yet. Wherever he goes, I hope he becomes a really nice player that represents the state of Indiana. And if he goes to Connecticut and people are upset about it, then I would say, I don't know, wait it out. There's a good chance a year from now he comes back for NIL money and transfers to IU and becomes a nice piece for him. I just don't get it. But I just personally think, while I understand and appreciate it, if you want to cheer for and get pleasure out of and excitement out of watching young people perform athletically, I do as well. I totally understand that aspect of it. If you take it personally to the point where it affects your own emotions because of the decision of a young person, I can't help you. I simply say congratulations to all of them for being able to put themselves in the position best for them. Casey Vallier has the best title of anybody over at the Colts complex. He is the in-game studio host, but most importantly, he is the radio coordinator. And based on our conversation the last time we talked to Matt Taylor, I don't know if Casey is also the telephone coordinator, but he's on a better line than Matt's, right? Because we've now gone for 45 seconds without it dropping. Is that right, Eddie?
Yeah, that is correct. No, Matt stays in the studio. I typically just step out, so I feel like I'm a little bit more. I can rely on my cell phone better than the in-home phones, if you will, inside our complex.
Does anybody say mobile phone anymore? Are they using cells anymore? Or is it all satellite now? How does that work?
That's a great question. I mean, I feel like every time I have to fill out anything, it asks for what my mobile phone is or my cell phone, but it's
right.
Like it's just a phone now.
Do you have a landline, Casey, at home? Do your parents still have a landline?
They do not. We got rid of our landline probably a good 10 years ago.
It'll be a sad day when my parents get rid of their landline. I'm not going to lie to you about that.
I mean, I still use it like that was like the Marsh and Kroger, input number for your rewards. So I still use it for my parents' Kroger rewards. But
you ever do that? Let me ask you this. Oh, so you're stealing gas discounts based on your parents' purchases?
Well, actually, I use my gas between my wife and I, but I give my parents every now and then some Kroger points. So I'm actually helping them out.
Do you ever type in? Let me ask you this: when you get to the pump and it says do you have a rewards number? Do you ever just type in 11 random numbers with 317 being the first ones, hoping that or 10 numbers, hoping that you get some guy that's racked up like 50,000 points? You're like, I have no idea who 257 it, but I'll tell you what, that guy. Thanks for the 40-cent discount.
That's a great idea. I never even thought of it.
Well, I'm thinking that's probably traceable, though. Then they go back and they look at your card, and they're like, yeah, Jack actually called here and was upset because his points were wiped out. I've got enough Speedy Reward points, Casey. I don't know if you know this or not. Next, and this is fun, actually. I think it's in 2026, March of 2026, I actually get Saudi Arabia.
That's actually what I was going to say is I need to figure out your number when I go to Speedway and try to get some of your points.
Unbelievable. I go there, and they're like, oh, congrats. I have an entire Diet Mountain Dew distributorship in Plano, Texas that belongs to me. Okay, let's begin with this. DeForest Buckner, Jonathan Taylor, the announcement today that they are going to return to practice. In Buckner's case, that means, Casey, that over the next 21 days, the Colts have to determine whether or not he gets elevated to the active roster or goes on IR for the year. I think we know what's going to happen there. Do we really have an idea on when the timetable is that Buckner will be active and on the field on game days, or does he have to go through practice before they can determine that?
I mean, just knowing DeForest Buckner, I was shocked that he went on IR because this is a guy who, he plays through every injury and, he's beat up every week, but typically he finds a way to get ready to play on Sundays. So I was initially shocked that he went on IR. So the idea that I get, now this is my word, not the team's word, with him practicing, I think it's a pretty good idea that he's probably going to be ready on Sunday. My thought is to kind of see where he is tomorrow, to see how a full day of practice, how all that feels on his ankle heading into tomorrow. But my thought is whenever they felt like they could open up that window, he's probably already been kind of gradually getting close to it, knowing when that window would be able to open, so that ultimately when they open it up, that I wouldn't be shocked to see him suit up on Sunday.
Casey, the difference that he makes to DeForest Buckner, obviously a great player, right?
Yeah.
But let's go into this. Those that have played, when you look, for example, at Liatu Latu and getting him going a little bit, Buckner on the other side, the juxtaposition that takes place of rotation once he's back out there, that means that we would see less of who that has been out there and presumably getting feet underneath them in his absence.
I would assume you're going to probably see a little bit more less of like Raekwon Davis. He's played a whole lot of bunch with Grover because you've got, Grover and Buckner are your tackles inside. So I see you're probably going to get less snaps from Raekwon Davis. You're probably going to get some less snaps from Taven Bryan as well. But I don't think as far as the outside guys, now I know guys like Dayo Dangbo has that flexibility to bounce in and out, so you might see him more just on the outside until they run to that NASCAR package, if you will, on a third down where it's a passing down and you can, take out Grover and put in a guy like Dayo inside. But ultimately, I think you're just going to see less snaps taken from Taven Bryan and Raekwon Davis and Adetomiwa Adebawore, just because Buckner is a guy that when he's healthy, I mean, he can play almost every snap for you, and you know how reliable Grover Stewart is. So those interior defensive tackles probably are going to see a lot less run when Buckner is healthy.
Casey, how much of the stakes that are up for grabs both this week and over this next 5-game stretch for the Colts do you think influence or helped necessitate DeForest Buckner returning or at least being in this 21-day practice window now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jimmy, because we actually talked about it. I was talking with my colleague JJ Stankovitz as we walked into the locker room, and I mentioned to him, I said, great time to start getting healthy. And we both kind of looked and we're like, not saying that it is, it was managed this way, but it is kind of ironic, and it works out that you were able to get through, that stretch you had with the Tennessees and the Miamis, teams that are, dealing with a lot of injuries themselves, and be able to kind of steady the ship while you were out guys like Buckner and Taylor. And, I mean, you talk about this stretch here on out. I mean, this is a brutal next 5 games that you really, if you want to have an opportunity to be playing postseason football, you got to come out of this, I mean, probably at worst 2-3, maybe 1-4, but then that really puts a lot of pressure on the back end of the schedule. So yeah, this next stretch, it makes a lot of sense to be able to get some of those guys coming back. And if you look at this Houston team, I mean, they were down 5 starters in last week's game. They don't have Nico Collins, definitely for this week. 2 of their linebackers were out. So it's like you're getting Houston at the right time because you're getting healthy while they are kind of in that injury bug that they're dealing with.
Let's, for the sake of argument, say Jonathan Taylor goes this Sunday. What did we learn in terms of usage and the ways it can benefit and take strain off Anthony Richardson? What the depth behind Jonathan Taylor contributes in Tyler Goodson and Trey Sermon? What have we learned about them over the last couple of weeks without JT in the fold?
Ultimately, I don't know if you've necessarily learned what those guys can do. I think for them, they were able to see what it looks like to have that type of a load. I mean, I really was impressed at what we've seen out of Tyler Goodson, because ultimately when training camp ends and you're trying to establish a roster, I thought Tyler Goodson, Evan Hull, it was a toss-up on which one. I felt like it was actually going to be a lean towards Evan Hull just because this staff drafted him and he offered a little bit more in the passing game. But I think I've been very surprised and pleasantly surprised at what Goodson has shown as a runner. We knew what he could do catching passes out of the backfield, but I think he has really run really hard. And Trey Sermon has just shored up everything that Shane Steichen has preached since he came in. He has that experience with him in Philadelphia, and I think you saw what Trey can do as, that different style back to a Tyler Goodson, and a little bit different to what Jonathan Taylor is. Jonathan Taylor's a home run ready to happen. Trey Sermon's kind of a nasty guy. He's the guy that's going to go, grind out a handful of yards, and you really need that. So I think ultimately what you saw is that these guys understand their role and they know how they can best have to help this offense. And a running game is so key to be able to have Anthony Richardson doing what he does best. So if you can get Jonathan Taylor back and you got these guys having some momentum, they've got some confidence, it only helps your running game.
Casey, you're in, the building. I mean, look, that's not – I want to be clear that people understand. I'm not pretending that means that you're like sitting there inside the tight end room, for example, when they're going over it, right? But you can get a sense for just atmosphere, tension maybe sometimes, pins and needles, or like a loose, laxed group. With this particular group, I mean, they're getting ready to go into – Jimmy and I were talking about it. The next 5 games are – really a gauntlet of some pretty darn good teams. Does this particular group seem to be a laxed one, a driven-in one? How would you describe the overall kind of feel of the maturity or youth of this group?
You mean the group as a whole, or are you talking tight ends?
No, yeah, sorry, the group as a whole, the team.
Honestly, it's a weird dynamic because I feel like they're really hitting their stride right now. And I know that's one thing that they always preach is you want to be playing your best football by this time. But I think it's a mentality thing that I have noticed a change the last couple weeks. Now, no one's going to run home and say the last 2 weeks you watch those games over and over again because they were wonderful video of football and how to win. But ultimately what it showed is that you can grind it out. And I think the biggest thing that you saw was the defense being able to kind of impose their will in the second half of the last couple of weeks, just 7 points allowed, haven't allowed a fourth down point in 2 weeks. So I think all of that has kind of played into it, because I would say that when you look at this team and you look at leaders on this team, a lot of those guys are on the defensive side of the ball. So that mentality is resonating through the entire room. So when you hear from Zaire Franklin, you're hearing the same things from Z as you're hearing from Anthony Richardson. As you're hearing from Kenny Moore, you're hearing the same from guys like Josh Downs and all of that. So it's all like they're buying in, and not that they weren't before, but I really get that sense right now that everything that Shane is preaching, everything that, the coordinators are preaching, the players are right in step, talking the same language right now.
Do we start to see more of Anthony Richardson, the running quarterback?
That probably, I would assume that's a really fair assessment to make, because we've all talked about it ad nauseum. You don't draft this guy 4th overall because he's a pocket passer, because that's just not what he is. And I think you saw last week, you do whatever you have to do to get a victory. In the passing game, by all accounts, it wasn't really rolling, so you had to turn a little bit more to the running game. I think a little bit of that might change if you do have a healthy Jonathan Taylor, because that can alleviate some of that pressure. But I think it's going to be a case-to-case basis, but I wouldn't be shocked to see a little bit more Anthony Richardson running. I don't know if 14 carries like he had last week is the recipe for success, because if you take that out, that is a lot of carries for a quarterback. But I do think that number is probably going to be a little higher than maybe what you saw the first part of the year.
Aren't they going to have to, though, Casey? Casey Vallier is our guest. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. At some point, and I get it, Richardson is, I said he's like Derrick Henry at times. He's just a big physical guy that can run. But while you want to lean into that and tap into that ability, aren't you kind of stubbing your toe from the area where he truly needs growth if we're going to see the finished product eventually of Anthony Richardson? Don't they have to basically keep almost force-feeding the pass game just to try to continue to get the reps to let it develop?
No, I think that's fair. I think absolutely that is fair. And, I think you could also make the argument also with, him missing a couple weeks because he wasn't 100% in part of this league is you got to fight through all kinds of injuries. Look at what Michael Pittman's dealing with a couple weeks ago. They thought potentially into the IR, and he's played back-to-back weeks and ultimately has been effective in those weeks. So there is a lot of that, but I think the key here is this is the quarterback that you're trying to, he's your franchise right now. You want to make sure you've got him at 100%. And I think the rest of it is going to come. So it's almost like you just take the positives and the strengths right now and you ease them into everything else. But I would agree. I think you do need to expand the passing game over the last handful of weeks. It has not looked what you want to see out of him, and I'm sure what this coaching staff has wanted to see. But it's all a growing thing. At the end of the day, he still has a very small sample size of what you have seen on tape. And, ultimately it's just, I think early they need to get him into a rhythm, and that's been the biggest issue. Last week he started 1 of 7, and he could just never really get into that rotation and that rhythm to be in sync with all the receivers. So I think that's part of it. Is we'll see if they make that effort early on to make sure you get him just completing a couple passes, because I think that will help and that will impact everything else in a positive way. Is if you can see and get that, that confidence level of completing some early passes, I think that goes a long way.
On the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, he is Casey Vallier, in-studio host and radio coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts. Casey, with Richardson, season opener, 9 for 19, 47% completion percentage, a quarterback rating of about 90, 6 carries, 56 yards. You mentioned that he's missed some games there in between. The most recent timeout against the Dolphins, 10 for 24, 41% completion percentage, 14 carries, 56 yards, QBR of 24. Where have been, or rather, how is Anthony Richardson different this time around against the Texans than he was in the opener?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jimmy, and I honestly don't know if I have an answer for you.
And the only reason I ask it is because this year is about growth. You know that, Jake's mentioned that, and perhaps this is a little too early in the season to say, definitively what he is, but has there been noticeable change in still a small sample size of 5 games?
Yeah, like I said, that's a great question, and it's something that he's going to have to continue to answer because they are real questions, and there is I wouldn't say it's a concern, but there are those, if you will, those little thought bubbles of I'm not really sure if we're seeing it completely, but I would agree that there are some strides that he definitely needs to start taking, and I'm sure he would say the same thing. Shane Steichen would also be in agreement. Everybody's trying to figure out how we can best suit what Anthony Richardson does, and in order to do that, everybody want to make that comparison to a guy coming out of college who completed a small percentage and has made that big jump is Josh Allen. And ultimately, you want to see the Josh Allen growth and that gain. And right now, it is, it's a lot of ups and downs, maybe a little bit more of the down in seeing that. So I don't know necessarily if I have a right answer for you that it's, absolutely, you're seeing it, because I think it is still a small sample size too. And that's one thing you got to kind of hold as a sidebar because of the injury concern. It's been there. But we can go back to the very, very small sample size we saw in Pittsburgh. But, before he got injured, that was probably the best we have seen Anthony Richardson. He looked poised. He looked very comfortable inside. I know it was only 4 pass attempts, but he completed 3 of those for 70-plus yards. They had a couple scoring drives before he left that game. And that is the kind of game you're trying to just take that game plan and move that along throughout the rest of the season, because that is the Anthony Richardson that you can be very, very successful for. Now, him going back to Houston, I would say arguably last year, outside of that Rams comeback in the second half, that start that he had in Houston was probably his best start to a game he has had. So he's got experience playing in NRG Stadium. He saw success, led a couple early scoring drives there. So I think that's where you got to find that happy medium where how can we get him involved early? Because I think one of the things that I have been impressed by with Anthony Richardson is when the odds are against him, he typically goes out and performs pretty well. Like, you're trailing in the second half, he's going to be out there and he's going to put you in situations, but it's got to be consistent. And that's the biggest issue, is getting that spread out through an entire game. So that's why I keep going back to early. You've got to be able to get him in rhythm, get him in sync early and often, because I think that's the best way you're going to see a more consistent Anthony Richardson.
If he has a completion percentage around 48% for the year, that's what it is right now. Let's say that's where it stays, but he doesn't get hurt the rest of the way. He stays completely healthy. I know it's a results-based business, but what would be your takeaway? What do you imagine the front office takeaway would be if, the accuracy issues are still there, but hey, he played almost a full season of football?
Well, this is the one that you didn't give me the answer to, but what's the final record? Are they a playoff team? Because you've seen him have some ugly completion percentages, and you could still get a victory. So there are, kind of 2 sides of that coin. I would agree completely that, you can't sustain long-term success completing 48% of your passes. That is undefeated in NFL history. That is one thing you cannot argue, because ultimately it is a passing game, and it's important to be able to win from the pocket, win completing passes. That is how, you look throughout all of football for a long time, and that is one way that you can win. So ultimately, it is a results-based league. So if it is at 48, 49%, you reach the playoffs. I think part of it you hold it as, okay, well, this is one area we have to improve. But, maybe if they make the playoffs, it means he's not turning the ball over, and, he's able to get creative in the red zone and have a handful of rushing touchdowns, and they do enough to not give the football away that you can be successful. But ultimately, that percentage, you just can't sustain long-term success doing that. So that is an area that will continue to be harped on and will need continued work if that's where it ends in 2024.
All right, Casey Vallier with the Colts, the in-game studio host, and, of course, as always, radio coordinator, joining us on the program. Casey, we appreciate it. Big one this Sunday in Houston. We'll be listening to it and appreciate the conversation today.
Oh, love joining you guys. I appreciate you.
All right, Casey Vallier joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Going to be interesting to watch all those things. Jimmy, the That's kind of that yin and yang with Anthony Richardson of I get the fact that you got to go with your strength, which is when he's running the ball, he's awfully tough. But at the same time, you've got to continue to give opportunities for him in the short passing game, the rhythm passing game, to become a passer.
I know people don't.
Mechanics.
I know people don't want him throwing the ball 40 or 50 times a game necessarily, but this has been my biggest concern since week 1, Jake, is what he can do as a runner. I don't need, I'm not saying I don't need to see it at all because it's game wrecking and it can help win you games. That's not what I'm saying, but I know that he has that in his bag. I need to know that he can complete
his bag.
50, 60, 70% of his passes, not go run for 15 carries for 56 yards in a squeaker against the Dolphins. I need to know he can operate as a passer.
Speaking of in his bag, when you were a kid, and I want you to stew on this, right?
Okay.
When you were a kid and you would trick or treat, you had a couple of options. Now, and I say this every year. They announced the trick or treating hours, and I realized that when back in my day when I was a kid, back then we didn't change the clocks, so I think it got darker earlier. So in my mind, we were out like all hours of the night. I mean, it probably was 5:30 or 6 o'clock
in the morning.
Yeah, that's right. But it seems to me now like literally at 4:30 in the afternoon, kids are out trick or treating, and you're like, what? In my mind, trick-or-treating began at like 6 and we were out until 9 o'clock at night, at 10 o'clock at night. I think that's probably absurd.
Sure.
But I can't be the only one that recalls it that way from a gabillion years ago. And again, you're younger, so your
9
mind.
9 o'clock feels like midnight when you're out by yourself or when you're out with a friend group
we
collecting
obviously
candy,
I'm talking
right?
about like we had like neighborhood kids, and then
Sure.
you had parents that chaperoned you from house to house. But I mean, it was, and I grew up in a subdivision. I mean, I grew up in an idyllic childhood, but the subdivision had all these kids, and you knew for months what you were going to go for Halloween. A lot of times you didn't tell people, and seemingly it was a multi-hour event instead of like a 90-minute window that ends at 6:30 or whatever. I know that it was totally different times and all of that, and it's probably totally inflated in my brain, but. The question is this: when you went, did you take A, and I want you to think about this because it's a two-part question.
Okay.
Did you take A, the little plastic jack-o'-lantern holder, door to door, B, some sort of like a grocery store bag, or C, a pillowcase? And then, in addition to that, what was the candy that when it was put in the bag, you looked at it and you're like, are these people serious? And then you made mental note of it because you're like, well, when I get 15, that house is getting egged in November because there's no way I'm taking that. So think about that, and we'll get your answer. This was an answer in a round of trivia that I was partaking in a couple of weeks ago. Something about novelty song to go number one. I think it was in the late 50s, maybe in the early 60s when this song reached number one, but obviously gets a lot of play this time of year. We're talking about Halloween candy and trick-or-treating in general. Somebody just sent me a tweet with their answer, which I totally agree with, in my opinion, and I'm not going to judge anybody, but there's only one correct answer on this question, and that is, what is the Halloween candy that when people handed it out, you were like, dude, are you serious? And it was like an immediate no-go. So two-part question, Jimmy. The first is this. You used what device to collect your candy?
Wait, so you're saying I can only have one option in this whole candy game of worst candy to receive now? You've set that bar?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
There's a definitive number one. There are several suitable answers.
Okay.
But there's a definitive number one answer.
So I used both the jack-o'-lantern. I remember that as a young kid, the plastic jack-o'-lantern bucket. But more often than not, especially towards like the waning years of trick-or-treating, it was a pillowcase.
Okay. And then the worst candy for you.
I hate coconut. So you gave me Almond Joys or
How long have you
Mounds,
been a
and
communist?
I'm upset. So I don't like coconut. Yeah.
Eddie, when you were a trick-or-treater.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's the other question. What age did you end trick-or-treating? What grade were you when the last time you trick-or-treated?
Probably middle school.
I think that's about right. The last year, typically, here's what's funny about trick-or-treating. You're probably like in that, you're like getting out of the single, like into teen, like 12 or 13, somewhere in there. And deep down, you really want to keep doing it, but you know you're kind of old for it. So people are like, you trick-or-treating this year? We're just going to go like dress as some teenagers. And you act like you're like over it, but deep down, you're like, yeah, I kind of wish I could still do it because it's fun.
Yeah,
right?
and you want the candy.
Yeah.
I would say 6th or 7th grade.
Okay.
If I always remember back then.
Eddie, what device did you use to accumulate the candy?
It varied. A bag or a jack-o'-lantern.
Okay. And your favorite, your least favorite candy, the one that when you got it, you're like, come on, man.
Almond Joy.
My man.
Gross.
Almond Joy's at least an established brand, okay? All right, now.
Mounds would be this, like, would you at least give us Mounds?
Or
no.
Crackle.
What?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's not a Crunch Bar, but it is a Crunch Bar. I really like Crackle. Mr. Good Bar, you know, I could leave that to the side, but Crackle,
Crackle? You don't like Crackle?
No.
Man. Do you like Crunch Bars?
No.
It's
I'm
the
thinking
same thing.
It's the same
That's
thing.
what I'm
No,
asking.
no,
like, is
no.
it a brand thing,
No,
or like you
no.
just don't like the
Crackle
Rice
or-
Crunch
no,
or whatever?
no.
All right. Wow, man, I love Crunch Bar. Bunch of Crunch is my go-to movie theater snack. I know it's not the conversation,
Okay.
but I'm feeling candy
Now,
today.
Cash Wooden is here. He is the pride of Plainfield High School. He's in here doing a job shadow for the day, and I'm sure his teachers are thrilled he selected this company to visit. So, Cash, you do a little broadcasting at Plainfield, correct?
Correct.
Little high school football, is that right?
Yep, 2 games so far.
Okay, and who'd they play in the games you did?
Mooresville and Whiteland.
Mooresville and Whiteland. Okay, now, when you were a kid trick-or-treating, which device did you use to collect candy? Did you go with the plastic jack-o'-lantern? Did you have like a grocery bag? Did you do the pillowcase? What method were you going with?
Whenever I first started, I bet I had a little plastic bucket of some sort, and now I'm doing a full bag because I get a lot, and I still do trick-or-treating.
You still do trick-or-treat? You're a freshman,
Take pride
right?
in that, yes.
Okay, so now what was the other one you do?
It's either like a big...
No, but you said you trick-or-treat, and then what else do you do like to celebrate? You just do the trick-or-treating, right?
Yes, and then a
Okay.
bunch of my family members come over. We eat.
So it's like a
Stuff
big
like that.
deal at your house. Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool. Now, what's the worst candy that you get?
I'm going to agree with everyone else here, except you. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Almond Joy. I can't stand Almond Joy.
How do you guys not find joy in Almond Joys? At least you don't
Okay,
like
wait,
coconut?
You're not going to win this one, but maybe you'll sway us with what's worse than Almond Joy.
I will agree to this. I will agree that coconut is a very polarizing candy. Like you either love it or you hate it, right?
It also bugged me when that was all that was in the bucket. Like, that's all you're leaving us with. At least you have options. I can
I've got
dodge
2
the Almond Joy.
others that I considered saying for least favorite. Tootsie Roll and Nerds.
I'd be very happy with both those candies. But Eddie's my ally on the Almond Joy, so I'm
I
not
think
going to fully
some of
knock
that
him.
might hit a little close to home for young Eddie. Okay, what about this? Maybe they didn't have them when you guys were kids. Maybe this was like whatever.
Sure.
The generic black and orange wrapped peanut butter taffy. They just like they're like scoop a handful and they're just black and orange wrapped, wax paper wrapped taffy, and it's peanut butter taffy.
I've seen those before. I would probably reach for that before I reach for the Almond Joy. I'll be honest with you.
Okay, Dots.
Black licorice is about the only one where I would
Dots
say
are okay, but the box only has like 3 of them in there, and one of them is stuck to the corner.
Yeah, especially the fun size you get.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I mean.
If you get the big boy Dots, you're rolling.
And then you always have that one person that like is some sort of a like anti-Halloween person. So they hand out either, and I'm not making light of this, but like little biblical pamphlets or pencils, or then there's always the one dentist that hands out toothbrushes, and you're like, come on, dude, really? What
I feel
are we
like
doing
gum
here?
is also really lazy.
Were you a big pixie stick guy or Fun Dip?
Okay, okay, anything that the pixie sticks. I mean, that's another one. You're like, really?
But I enjoyed getting a couple of those in the bag because after you've had like 15 Reese's in a row, it's nice to get a little fruity flavor in there and mix it up.
I'll grant you that, but it does feel that one also feels kind of lazy, right? Like
as long as you're not giving away
suckers. What
gum,
about dumb suckers? You're like, really?
Yeah, sure.
What am I at the bank?
Sucker.
What are we doing here?
My dad's trying to deposit a check, and here I am trying to trick or treat.
Right.
What are we doing? Yeah,
I don't need that.
Sure.
What kind of crap are we doing here? And then there's always the one, when you're really little, there's always the one house that throws like quarters or 50-cent pieces. Like, dude, those people are so rich. We call it in Shelbyville, there was one, we call it the rich house. Like, they give out money. But if you are, now here's the other two sides of the spectrum on this.
Okay.
Full-size candy bar house.
Love it.
If you're the full-size candy bar house, I mean, like, that is like literally.
That's a point of contention in the cookhouse. I want us to be a full-size candy bar house. Haley's like, no, we're not doing it.
So a couple of years ago, I told Shannon, I'm like, we're going to be a full-size house, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you something. That's like throwing bread to the seagulls. They tell all their friends.
Yes.
Within 5 seconds, it's like, holy cow, everything, all of Ivy Hills is now shifted this way, right? You see it coming, literally, like one if by land and two if by sea. They're coming just in droves because they've gotten the word out. Full-size whatchamacallits at this house, or Reese's or whatever else.
Yeah.
1 year, this was a sad moment of my life. 1 year, I had to go past my parents' house on Halloween, and I pulled up. I had to drop something off. I'd forgotten it was Halloween. It's 5:30 or whatever. My parents had gone out to run an errand or whatever else. And I say this jokingly, but there is a small table on my parents' front door with the sign that says, please take only one.
It's a bold,
I'm
thoughtful strategy.
like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my parents have, like, because when you watch just any group of people, but that goes beyond like into the classical music bird watching stage. Now they're into the trustworthy Halloween stage, and you're like, oh no. So I felt so bad, and I said to my mom, I'm like, Mom, you know that? My mom's like, oh no, I'm well aware. Yeah, I mean, the first kid's going to take the whole thing. So then I'm like, okay, I don't feel as bad about like some sort of gullible, should we take the keys from Mom and Dad about my parents over this, because my mom was totally aware of the absurdity of the notion that somebody would take just
there wasn't a crown prince that was offering her riches beyond belief that she also told you about that day? That's
my
good.
mom's like, actually, I bought some neat things off cable TV. No, Mom, no. I'm just telling you. All right, so do you have plays of the day, Jimmy?
Of course.
So, Cash, by the way, you're back to school. Now, how did you get out of school today?
Did
we need to call somebody on this?
No, everyone is notified.
Okay, so there is school today, or you had a school day off, and therefore you're here.
Freshmen and seniors have like a college day, intern day where they go somewhere, look at stuff, and then juniors and sophomores have pre-SATs, which sounds awful. But if I went to school today, I'd be sitting in the cafeteria for 7 hours straight, doing who knows what.
Okay, so next year you'll be doing pre-SAT day on this day.
Yeah.
Would you say this is slightly above sitting in the cafeteria for 6 hours straight by yourself?
Oh, like tier.
Wow,
above.
okay.
Now, I'm going to give you a little tip here for all young people listening right now. You ready? The SATs, the ACTs, and the pre-SATs. Society will dictate and determine to you that your life rises and sets on the validity and the performance that you do on those tests. It is incredibly important that you do well. Don't get me wrong, but you need to understand this. Those are not the kinds of things that are going to get you into college or keep you out of college. Those tests are the ultimate, basically, final accentuation of what you do on your transcript. And if you have a low test score, it is not going to hold you out. But if you have a really high test score, it can help you if you have other areas that they have question about. So don't go into it with this pressure that your life is over if you're like me and you didn't do well on it. I mean, I took them twice. So don't buy into all of the pressure that comes with the fact that your life is going to rise or set based on that test. It is important that you prepare for it and do your best, but don't feel like your life is going to go a certain direction if you don't do well on it. That's the important thing to remember.
Educate and entertain.
They're tiebreakers, but they are not the end-all, be-all. All right, we'll come back. We'll get Jimmy's plays of the day next.
Today brought to you by the fine folks at Greenfield Signs and Lighting. Greenfield Signs, a professional, comprehensive sign company with 2 locations in central Indiana. They'll take your signage ideas and take hold of the project from design all the way to delivery. Family owned and managed for more than 4 generations. You don't often get a second chance to make a first impression. Make the most out of your first opportunity with Greenfield Signs and Lighting. For more information, go to greenfieldsigns.com. Today's plays of the day. We do have a couple Pacers bets for you, but first, let's take a trip across the pond. Maybe.
Are we swimming?
Swimming across the pond today. Champions League match day 3 continues.
Was a
That's right.
I'll take Erling Haaland of Manchester City as an anytime goal scorer today against Prague. I will also take Bayern
Prague?
Munich. Yes.
Wait a minute. What are we talking here? What sport are we doing?
The Champions League, so it's all of Europe.
football.
I thought the Champions League is there's the English Premier League, right?
Correct.
And then there's the other, and then they all get together, and that's the
Correct.
Champion League.
Yes.
In
Yep.
Prague, they got to. Who does Prague play in their league? Are they in the Czech league? Who
They're
does,
in the
who does
balance.
Prague play?
I'm just
what other school?
I'm just trying to get
who's Prague's rival?
I'm just trying to get an Erling Haaland bet in there. I'll be honest with you, I'm unfamiliar with Sparta Prague is their full name if you're looking for a little reconnaissance for you to
Sparta.
do there. Anyway, Erling Haaland has scored 2 or more today, that at plus 145. Other Champions League bet I'm going for more familiar teams here. I'll take Bayern Munich to beat Barcelona. Tie no bet, so if this thing draws, you get your money back on that wager. Pacers open the season tonight in Detroit against the Pistons. I'll lay the 5 on the Indiana Pacers. I think this is a statement game out of the gate for the Pacers. I'm not expecting big things from Detroit. They're favored by 5. I will lay that number. Additionally, I will say yes at minus 135 odds to the question of, will Tyrese Halliburton record a double-double tonight? So give me yes, Tyrese Halliburton double-double. Pacers minus 5. Erling Haaland score 2 or more, and Bayern Munich over Barcelona. Eddie, any plays for you?
Yeah, over 9.5 assists, you get better odds on it, just a FYI, because I figured Tyrese Halliburton to score 10 points. You're pretty much betting on the 10 assists over there,
You
Jimmy.
could also
So,
shop around. But anyway, Eddie, your bets.
yes, I am taking Tyrese over 9.5 assists, as I just laid out there. I will be taking Benedict Mathurin in this game. Look, we know historically Benedict Mathurin loves playing the Pistons because of the Jaden Ivey
Revenge
draft.
game.
Yes. He gets motivated extra for this one, so I'm taking Benedict Mathurin over on his points. Last I saw it was at 12.5. I think it's still there, so I've got Mathurin off the bench scoring 13 today.
So, you said it's Slavia Prague? Is
Sparta
that
Prague.
Sparta Prague. I'm looking at the Europa League.
They are the most successful club in the Czech Republic.
Well, I mean, that's like being the starting center for the Lollipop Guild, is it not? How many teams are there in the Czech League? Do we know? I'm looking at it right here.
They're also labeled one of the most successful in Central Europe, Jake.
Okay. Now, I'm looking at here. Here's Borat's favorite team, which is 30th in the Europa League. That's Nice. They're 30th.
Well done.
I don't see, though, I'm looking right here, unless it's the Slavia Prague, I don't see a Prague team.
Well,
What league are you looking at?
Their official team name, I try to avoid getting into areas where I don't know how to pronounce things, is Athletic Club Sparta Praha, which is commonly known as Sparta Prague or Sparta Prague. Maybe I'm pronouncing that phrase wrong. I don't know. I just wanted the Erling Haaland bet, Jake. That's all I wanted. I don't
Wait a
care
minute.
about Sparta.
Does Dublin have a team?
Yes.
Are they going to be playing next
Well,
week?
not the Champions League, but yeah.
I know, but do I need to go watch a match in Dublin?
Ooh,
I'm going to
can
be in Dublin and Edinburgh, Scotland.
Let me do some research on that. That would be good to be able to see you. I don't know if there's an Oregon Duck you can take a picture with there or not, but I think you'd have a fun time. Yeah.
they scored the
Yeah. Anyway, the point
Get
is
him
I
out
just want
there on
Erling
the
Haaland
wing,
to
he's
score
open.
twice. That's all I care about.
You
I have
know,
missed the accent. It's been a long time.
do you know how great it's going to be when I get back? Because I'm going to Ireland next week. Do you know how great it's going to be when I get back? You guys are going to love it. Top of the day to you. Company here, the Colts get a big win over the weekend. People actually, and kids in particular, love it.
Are you
Cash-
coming back with pints?
Is there a chance
Yes.
you don't come back at all? Is there a chance Shannon just leaves you there? You're so immersed with the
Also,
accent.
yes, entirely possible. I hear Scotland's better, but you can't understand anybody. It's like that movie Train Spotting. It's just a bunch of guys running around like, choose a career. You know, what? Nobody knows what's going on. I'm just telling you. We're going to the Guinness Brewery, Eddie, and you can pay in advance to get a Guinness poured with your face in the little foam. So do you want me
Have
to
you
bring
looked at reviews on that? Like, how accurate is the?
You know what you should do? You
picture.
should do that ahead of time.
Everybody's had a Guinness you're looking at it though. You haven't had the Guinness yet. So
What you need to do is ahead of time. You have to do that ahead of time. Is that what you said, right?
what's that?
The picture, you have to submit it ahead of time.
Well, it's in the head of the Guinness. Yeah. No, they look at you right there and they just do it.
Oh, that's very unfortunate. I was going to say you should have them do J&V for Shannon.
It's a bad idea where that was going
Here's
the
the
whole
thing,
way.
Eddie. I would actually have them do it for you, but they were like, no, we do this in pint glasses, not large oil drums. I'm like, okay, well.
Then in that matter, you should have my face for Shannon then. There you go.
In that case, yes. Is J&V here today or is he on remote? J&V is here today. All right, so he'll be in just a couple of minutes. All right, so tonight, Pacers, Pistons. We will
Season
obviously
opener.
talk about that tomorrow. It is – I think Detroit last year, I mean, it was amazing how bad they were because they do have individualized talent. I mean, that's the thing that, you know, you look at them and you're like, man, they were so awful.
On paper, the last couple of years, especially post-draft classes, you would be optimistic if you were a Pistons fan, and because of injuries and just downright Detroit getting in the way of Detroit, they've been a dumpster fire.
J&V's here. But
This is better than me right here.
He's now wearing a belt.
Right there. I know when I'm tucking my shirt in and everything. I'm all grown up.
When's the last time you – a belt and a watch?
Well, look at this shirt. X103 Express.
The collector's item shirt, right?
I'm going through my closets.
That's impressive, man. All right. J&V's up next. You got a lot of
belt, get my shirt tucked in.
Pacers
Hey, who do I have
Pistons
here?
chat tonight.
Who's here?
This is Cash Wooden,
Hi, Cash.
relative of John Wooden. He's
Good
the
to see
pride
you,
of
buddy.
Plainfield High School. He's in here today as part of job shadowing day at Plainfield.
Way to go, Cash.
So he came in. How boring was it, Cash? We put you to sleep?
It was pretty fun. I mean, watching everyone just do their thing. It was pretty fun. Then I got called up here, talk about Halloween.
Can we make fun of Mr. Mincer really quick? Can we do that?
Sure.
Where's Mick? Is he the principal over there, Mr. Mincer?
Oh,
You don't really go to Plainfield, do you, Cash?
No.
I do.
Hey.
But I think there's a different principal now.
No. Let me tell you this. Make sure you tell Mr. Mincer that I was always going to be the best basketball player that ever went to Indiana State. Okay, tell him that. He thinks he is because Batesville, and he was way too tiny.
He had
I
a
would
couple
take him
big
in the
shots,
post
though,
and be
John.
over. Huh?
He had a couple of big shots in his career, right?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yes, not you. Yeah.
A couple of them, right? All right, J&V's up next. We'll be back with you at noon tomorrow talking about Pacers, Pistons, and the Colts, of course. Thank you for listening to Query & Company.